Imagine being a pharaoh so annoyed by flies that you ordered your servants to be stripped naked and covered in honey, just so the bugs would bother them instead of you. This wasn't a myth. It was the daily life of Pharaoh Pepi II. We've been told the same stories about the Pyramids and Cleopatra for decades, but the real history of ancient Egypt is far darker and weirder than your history books let on. I'm Matt, and this is Forgotten Chronicle HQ. Today, we're counting down 67 facts about ancient Egypt that will completely change how you see this civilization. Stick around, because by the time we hit fact 29, you'll never look at the Nile River the same way again. The pyramids were not built by slaves. Archaeological evidence shows the workers were actually paid laborers who were buried in honorable tombs nearby and even had access to prime cuts of meat. King Tutankhamun was likely killed by a hippopotamus. Recent scans of his mummy show massive rib damage consistent with a hippo strike, which was a common danger during royal hunting trips. Pharaohs were rarely as thin and fit as they appear in statues. The Egyptian diet was heavy on beer, bread, and honey, and scans of royal mummies show that many rulers were actually overweight and diabetic. Pharaohs never let their hair be seen in public. They always wore a crown or a Nemes-striped headdress to maintain an image of divine perfection, hiding any natural thinning. Ramses the Great had over 100 children. With dozens of wives and concubines, Ramses II lived so long that he outlived many of his own sons. Cleopatra was not ethnically Egyptian. She was actually of Greek Macedonian descent, part of the Ptolemaic dynasty that took over after Alexander the Great. Pharaoh Akhenaten tried to delete all other gods from history. He forced the empire to worship only the sun disk, Aten, making him the most hated man in Egypt once he died. Pharaohs often married their own sisters or daughters. This was done to keep the divine bloodline pure and to ensure that no outsiders could claim a right to the throne. Even female pharaohs, like Hatshepsut, wore false beards. These were made of goat hair and worn to signify their legal status as king and to mimic the god Osiris. The cursed tomb of King Tut was actually very small and cramped. Because he died so young and unexpectedly, they likely shoved him into a tomb originally meant for a lesser official. Pepi II used honey slaves to keep flies away. He would order slaves to be covered in honey so that insects would be attracted to them instead of his royal skin. The Nile River Ritual. To ensure the river would continue to flood and provide a harvest, some pharaohs would publicly masturbate into the Nile during religious festivals. They believed the sun god, Ra, died every night. Every sunset was seen as a battle where Ra had to defeat the chaos serpent, Apophis, in the underworld to ensure the sun would rise. Ancient Egyptians were the first to use breath mints. They boiled frankincense, myrrh, and cinnamon with honey to create small pellets to mask the smell of spices and tooth decay. They used moldy bread to treat infections. Long before penicillin, they realized applying moldy bread to a wound stopped the rot, unknowingly using natural antibiotics. Egyptian doctors were highly specialized. There were specific doctors for the eyes, teeth, and even guardians of the anus, who specialized in administering enemas. They used a bizarre pregnancy test involving seeds. A woman would urinate on barley and wheat. If the barley grew, it was a boy. If the wheat grew, it was a girl. The world's oldest prosthetic was a wooden toe. Found on an Egyptian mummy, the Cairo toe showed signs of wear, proving it was a functional medical device. Both men and women wore heavy black and green eye makeup. The lead-based coal helped protect their eyes from the sun's glare and acted as a disinfectant against infections. Egyptian pillows were actually made of stone. These headrests were curved to cradle the neck, keeping the head elevated to preserve hairstyles and stay cool. They treated baldness with hippopotamus and snake fat. While it didn't actually grow hair back, it was one of the many expensive cures sold by ancient pharmacists. Ancient Egyptians had a god of toilets. His name was Am-Her, a minor deity described as a devourer of millions, often associated with the darker side of hygiene. They used crocodile dung for contraception. Ancient papyrus records suggest a mixture of crocodile dung and honey was used as a vaginal suppository to prevent pregnancy. Egyptian toothpaste was incredibly abrasive. Made of crushed eggshells and pumice, it cleaned the teeth, but also wore the enamel down to the gums over time. Dream temples were used for healing. Sick people would spend the night in these temples, hoping the gods would send them a dream that contained a cure. They were remarkably good at brain surgery. Skulls have been found with trepanation holes that show clear signs of healing, meaning the patients actually survived. They believed the heart, not the brain, was the seat of intelligence. During mummification, the brain was scrambled and pulled out through the nose to be discarded. Egyptian women had more rights than almost any other ancient civilization. They could own property, sign legal contracts, and even initiate divorce. The first recorded labor strike in history happened in Egypt. Tomb builders walked off the job because their grain rations, their wages, were late. Egyptian children didn't wear clothes until puberty. Due to the intense heat, children usually went naked, wearing only jewelry until their teen years. Beer was so essential, it was used as currency. It was thick, nutritious, and safer than Nile water. Workers were often paid in several liters of beer a day. Mourning a pet cat involved shaving off your eyebrows. When a family cat died, the household would go into mourning until the eyebrows grew back. They were the first to use police dogs. Egyptian authorities used trained monkeys and dogs to catch criminals in busy market squares. Some female servants wore only a string of beads. Clothing was a sign of status, and servants in high-status homes often went without it. Egyptian workers once staged a strike because they ran out of makeup. They considered eye paint a vital medical supply for sun protection and refused to work without it. Dwarves were highly respected and held high-ranking jobs. They were seen as being magically touched by the gods and often worked as elite jewelers. They believed the world was flat like a pancake. To them, the earth was the god Geb, and the sky was the goddess Nut, arching over him. Ancient Egyptians had a god of chaos that was a mystery animal. To this day, historians aren't sure what animal the god Set was supposed to be. The Nile provided mud medicine. River silt was used in various poultices, though the high bacteria content likely caused more infections than it cured. They believed sneezing was the soul trying to escape the body. This led to various rituals to ensure the soul stayed firmly planted inside. Pigs were considered unclean. While eaten by the poor, they were associated with the god Set and avoided by the upper class and priests. They used ostrich eggshells as water canteens. The shells were durable and, once cleaned, made for perfect, lightweight containers for desert treks. Soldiers were often paid with salt. Salt was a vital preservative and so valuable that it is the origin of the modern word salary. They were the first to domesticate the African wildcat. Originally brought in to hunt rodents, cats eventually became semi-divine. Ancient Egyptians believed your shadow was a separate part of your soul. Known as the Shut, it represented your power and had to be protected. The Step Pyramid was the world's first skyscraper. Built for Djoser, it was the first time humans stacked stone on such a massive scale. The Great Pyramid was originally white and shiny. It was covered in polished Tura limestone that would have reflected the sun like a giant mirror. King Tut was buried with a dagger made from a meteorite. Since they hadn't mastered iron smelting, iron from the sky was more valuable than gold. The Sphinx was likely painted in bright colors. Traces of red and blue pigment suggest the giant statue was originally vibrant and gaudy. Ancient Egyptians invented the 365-day calendar. They needed it to predict the exact day the Nile would flood each year. They used magic wands made of hippo ivory. These weren't for spells, but for midwives to draw protective circles around pregnant women. The Valley of the Kings was a secret graveyard. After the pyramids were easily robbed, pharaohs started hiding their tombs in remote desert canyons. They used magic bricks to protect their houses. Bricks inscribed with spells were placed in the corners of rooms to keep out ghosts. Pharaohs were often buried with ghost boats. Full-sized wooden ships were buried next to pyramids so the king could sail across the sky. The Great Pyramid is the only ancient wonder still standing. It has outlived the Lighthouse of Alexandria and the Hanging Gardens by millennia. They used test tube-style perfumes. They would soak flowers in fats and wring them out using cloth presses to extract liquid scents. They built massive obelisks from a single piece of stone. These giant pillars could weigh over 400 tons and were moved hundreds of miles without modern machinery. The pyramids are aligned to true north. The Great Pyramid of Giza is aligned with an accuracy of within 3/60ths of a degree. The curse of the pharaohs was likely mold. Sealed tombs contained ancient mold spores that caused respiratory infections in archaeologists. They didn't just mummify people, they mummified millions of animals. From cats to crocodiles, animals were sent as messengers to the gods. The afterlife was a field of reeds where you still had to work. The dead were buried with shabti dolls meant to do their manual labor for them. Some mummies were found with gold tongues. These were given to the dead so they could speak directly to the gods in the afterlife. They used onions in funeral rituals. Onions symbolized eternity because of their layered structure and were often placed in the eyes of mummies. The Book of the Dead was a cheat sheet. It was a collection of spells and passwords needed to get past demons guarding the gates of the afterlife. Ancient Egyptians used honey as an antibiotic for the living and dead. Its natural antibacterial properties made it the ultimate preservative. They believed you died twice. Once when your body failed, and a second death when the last person on Earth said your name for the last time. We are closer in time to Cleopatra than she was to the pyramids. Cleopatra lived around 30 BC, while the Great Pyramid was built 2,500 years before her. Ancient Egypt was a world where gold flowed like water, but honey and salt were the real treasures. If you found these facts as mind-blowing as I did, hit that like button and let me know in the comments which fact was the weirdest. If you're ready for more ancient madness, click here to watch our 101 facts about the Roman Empire. I'm Matt, this is Forgotten Chronicle HQ, and I'll see you in the next one.